I stood at the back of St. Catherine's Cathedral, watching the woman I'd loved for 8 years walk down the aisle toward another man. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd helped pay for this wedding. Hell, I'd practically funded the entire thing through the anonymous donation her family had received 6 months ago when they were struggling with costs. They never knew it came from me, and neither did she. Sophia looked breathtaking in that ivory silk gown, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon with my grandmother's vintage hairpins, though she didn't know they were mine either. I'd had my assistant arrange for them to be found at an antique shop she frequented. Everything about this day was perfect, from the cascading white roses I'd specially ordered from my private greenhouse to the string quartet I'd hired under a false company name. The cathedral was packed with 500 guests, the city's elite mingling with her working-class family. I recognized faces from board meetings and charity galas, people who'd never given Sophia a second glance when she was just a struggling art teacher. Now she was marrying into old money, becoming Mrs. Richard Whitmore III, and suddenly everyone wanted to celebrate her. But I could see what others couldn't, the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped her bouquet, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the pause, barely perceptible, when the pastor asked if anyone objected to this union. For a moment her gaze swept the crowd, and I could have sworn she was looking for someone, looking for me. I should have spoken up then, should have stood and declared what everyone in this room needed to hear. Instead, I remained silent, watching the woman I'd loved since college promise herself to a man who would never deserve her. My love story with Sophia began in the most ordinary way possible, a shared table at an overcrowded campus coffee shop during our senior year. She was struggling with her student loan paperwork, tears of frustration threatening to spill over, and I was pretending to read a business journal while actually watching her try to make sense of numbers that didn't add up to a future she could afford. I was already different then, having inherited my first trust fund at 18, but I'd learned to hide my wealth. Too many friendships had been tainted by money, too many relationships built on what I could provide rather than who I was. So when I offered to help her with those forms, I was just another broke college student, not the heir to a Fortune 500 empire. We became friends first, study partners who shared late-night pizza and dreams about changing the world. She wanted to teach art to underprivileged kids. I wanted to prove I was more than my family's money. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, and I fell in love with her mind before I ever admitted to myself that I loved her. The night before graduation, I'd planned to tell her everything, about my feelings, about my family, about the future I wanted us to build together. I'd bought a simple silver ring, nothing flashy, just a promise of more to come. But then her parents came to the ceremony, and I overheard her father talking about how worried he was about her future, how she needed to find someone stable, someone who could provide for her. I realized that night that my love came with complications she didn't need. A working-class girl with dreams of teaching didn't need the scrutiny that would come with dating a billionaire. So I stayed silent, graduated, and watched her move to the city to chase her dreams while I took my place in the family business. Block 3. The man she deserved, or so I thought. Richard Whitmore III entered Sophia's life 2 years ago at a charity auction I'd anonymously sponsored at the museum, where she'd finally landed her dream job as an art education coordinator. I watched from across the room as he approached her, charm oozing from every pore, and I knew immediately that he was everything I'd convinced myself she needed. He was handsome in that aristocratic way that comes from generations of good breeding and better dentistry. His family had old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, the kind that came with automatic social acceptance. Most importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in her work, her passion for bringing art to children who'd never held a paintbrush. I told myself I was happy for her when they started dating. convinced myself that watching her laugh at his jokes from across crowded gallery openings was enough. I'd created a dozen reasons to attend every event where they appeared together, always maintaining my distance, always playing the role of the mysterious benefactor who supported the arts, but never got too involved. Richard was patient with her. He understood her need to work, her passion for her students, her insistence on splitting dinner bills even though his family could buy the restaurant. He introduced her to his world gradually, never making her feel out of place among the country club set. When he proposed last Christmas, I was there, hiding behind a marble pillar at the museum's holiday gala, watching him get down on one knee beside the Monet I donated in her honor. She said yes, and I told myself that this was how love stories were supposed to end. The good guy wins the girl, and the complicated man who waited too long learns to live with his choices. I threw myself into work, expanded the company into 3 new markets, and tried to forget that every expansion was really just a way to avoid thinking about wedding planning. Block 4. The Wedding Planner's Secret. 6 months before the wedding, I did something I'm not proud of. I hired the most exclusive wedding planning company in the city and had them approach Sophia's family with an offer they couldn't refuse. A contest winner package that would cover all wedding expenses. The cover story was elaborate, a social media campaign promoting local love stories, but it was worth every lie to see the relief on her mother's face. I told myself I was just being kind, that any friend would want to help. But the truth was more complicated and infinitely more selfish. I wanted to give her the perfect day, even if it meant watching her marry someone else. I wanted to be part of her happiness, even if she never knew it. Working through intermediaries and false companies, I orchestrated every detail. The vintage Bentley that would carry her to the church was from my private collection. The champagne at the reception was from my family's vineyard in France. Even the 7-piece orchestra was comprised of musicians I discovered and funded through my arts foundation. The wedding planner, Miranda Ashworth, eventually figured out who was really behind the generosity. She cornered me at my office 3 weeks before the ceremony, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against my mahogany desk as she studied me with the calculating gaze of someone who'd orchestrated 1,000 society events. "You're in love with her," she said simply. It wasn't a question. I could have denied it, should have denied it. Instead, I found myself confessing to this near stranger, admitting that I'd been funding Sophia's happiness from the shadows for years. The art supplies that mysteriously appeared in her classroom, the scholarship fund that paid for her students' museum visits, the anonymous buyer who'd purchased her painting at last year's charity auction for 10 times its asking price. "Then why are you letting her marry him?" Miranda asked. I didn't have a good answer then. I still don't. Block 5. The moment everything changed. The ceremony was proceeding exactly as planned. Richard stood confidently at the altar, his groomsmen arranged in perfect formation, his smile never wavering as his bride approached. The guests were appropriately misty-eyed, phone cameras discreetly capturing moments for social media posts that would be shared within the hour. Everything was picture perfect, exactly what I'd paid for. But then, Pastor Williams reached the part about objections, and something shifted in the cathedral's atmosphere. The traditional words hung in the air. If anyone has a reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace. The silence stretched longer than it should have. I felt every muscle in my body tense, every instinct screaming at me to stand up, to finally say what I'd kept locked away for 8 years. But I remained frozen in my pew, watching as Sophia's grip tightened on her bouquet, her knuckles white against the ivory silk of her gloves. Then Richard's phone buzzed. In the dead silence of that sacred moment, the electronic sound was jarring, inappropriate. He glanced down reflexively, and I saw his face change, saw the smile falter, the confidence crack. He looked up at Sophia, then quickly away. and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever message he'd received was about to destroy everything. "Richard?" Sophia's voice was barely audible, but in the cathedral's acoustics, it carried to every corner. "What's wrong?" He fumbled with the phone, trying to silence it, but it was too late. The damage was done. The perfect moment had shattered, and I could see realization dawning in Sophia's eyes. She knew him well enough to read the guilt written across his features, the panic he couldn't quite hide. "We should continue," he said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. The pastor looked confused, the groomsmen shifted uncomfortably, and the guests began to murmur among themselves. That's when Sophia did something that surprised everyone, including me. She looked directly at Richard and asked, "Who is she?" Block 6. The truth unravels. The question hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Richard's face went pale beneath his perfectly applied tan, and I watched 8 months of careful planning and pretense crumble in real time. The guests seemed to hold their collective breath, sensing drama, but not yet understanding its scope. "Sophia, please," Richard whispered, reaching for her hand. "Not here, not now." But she stepped back, her wedding dress rustling against the marble steps. "No, Richard, I asked you a question. Who is she?" I'd always admired Sophia's strength, but I'd never seen her like this. Fierce, uncompromising, demanding truth in a moment when lies would have been easier for everyone. The woman who'd always been considerate of others' feelings, who'd spent years making herself smaller to fit into Richard's world, was finally taking up space. Richard glanced around the cathedral, probably calculating the social cost of honesty versus the destruction of continued deception. His mother sat in the front row, her face a mask of horror at the public nature of this confrontation. His father looked ready to intervene, to smooth over whatever scandal was brewing, with the practiced ease of old money protecting itself. "There's no one," Richard said finally, but even I could hear the lie in his voice. Sophia laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. "Your phone says otherwise, the same phone that's been buzzing with messages from C for the past 3 weeks. The same phone you've been hiding from me like I'm too stupid to notice." Nay, I felt sick watching this unfold. This wasn't how her wedding day should go. This beautiful, kind woman who deserved every happiness was being humiliated in front of 500 people, and I was sitting there doing nothing to stop it. "Fine," Richard snapped, his careful facade finally cracking completely. "Yes, there's someone else, but it's complicated, Sophia." She pulled off her engagement ring and dropped it at his feet. Then she turned and walked away, her head held high. Block 7. The Flight and the Chase. I watched Sophia disappear through the massive oak doors of the cathedral, and every protective instinct I'd suppressed for 8 years roared to life. The guests were in chaos, some standing, some whispering furiously, some pulling out phones to capture what would undoubtedly become the society scandal of the year. Richard was arguing with his father while his mother frantically tried to salvage some dignity from the situation. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the woman who'd just had her heart broken in front of 500 people. I pushed through the crowd, ignoring the surprised looks from people who recognized me. By the time I reached the cathedral steps, Sophia was already in the vintage Bentley, my vintage Bentley, that was supposed to carry her to the reception as a married woman. Instead, she was fleeing her own wedding, alone and devastated. The driver looked confused, clearly unsure of protocol for this unprecedented situation. I approached the car, just as Sophia looked up and saw me through the window. Our eyes met for the first time in 2 years, and I saw recognition flash across her face, followed immediately by something I couldn't quite read. Surprise, relief, or maybe just the exhaustion of someone who'd reached her breaking point. She rolled down the window. "Alex, what are you doing here?" Of all the questions she could have asked, that was the hardest to answer honestly. What was I doing there? I'd told myself I was just paying my respects, supporting a friend from a distance. But standing there, looking at her tear-stained face and trembling hands, I couldn't lie anymore. Not to her, and not to myself. "I came for you," I said simply. Before she could respond, I heard footsteps behind me. Richard had followed us out, still trying to control a narrative that was rapidly spiraling beyond his influence. "Sophia, we need to talk about this privately." "No." Her voice was steady now, stronger than it had been inside. "We're done talking, Richard. We're done with everything." She looked at me again. "Get in," she said. Block 8, 8 years of questions. The Bentley pulled away from the cathedral in complete silence, leaving behind the chaos of a ruined wedding and 500 shocked guests. Sophia stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap, her wedding dress spread around her like fallen snow. I sat beside her, acutely aware that this was the closest we'd been in years, and the circumstances couldn't have been more devastating. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Anywhere," she whispered, "just away from here." As we drove through the city streets, I found myself memorizing every detail of this moment. The way the afternoon light caught the pearls on her dress, the delicate curve of her neck where a few strands of hair had escaped her perfect updo, the way she held herself together despite everything that had just happened. Finally, she turned to me. 8 years, Alex. It's been 8 years since we really talked, and you show up today. Why? I'd been dreading this question since the moment I decided to attend the wedding. How could I explain 8 years of loving her from a distance? 8 years of anonymous gifts and secret support. 8 years of watching her build a life with someone else while telling myself it was for the best. "I've never stopped caring about you," I said carefully. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Caring about me? Alex, you disappeared. After graduation, you vanished like you'd never existed. I tried to find you, tried to stay in touch, but it was like you'd decided we'd never been friends at all." The pain in her voice was unbearable. I'd convinced myself that my distance was protecting her, but I'd never considered how it might feel like abandonment. "I thought you were better off without me. Better off without you." She turned to face me fully now, her eyes blazing with 8 years of suppressed hurt. "You were my best friend. You were the person I talked to about everything, and then suddenly you were gone." "You didn't do anything wrong," I said quickly. "It was never about you. It was about me, about my family, about complications you didn't need in your life." "What complications? What are you talking about?" This was it, the moment I'd been avoiding for 8 years. Block 9, the revelation. "My name isn't just Alex Morrison," I began. "It's Alexander Morrison III. My family owns Morrison Industries." The silence in the car was deafening. I watched Sophia's face as she processed what I'd just told her, saw the exact moment when the pieces started falling into place. Morrison Industries wasn't just a company. It was an empire. Hotels, real estate, technology, media. The Morrison name was synonymous with wealth and power that stretched across continents. "That's impossible," she said finally. "You lived in that tiny apartment off campus. You worked at the campus bookstore. You ate ramen noodles for dinner because that's all you could afford." "I chose to live that way," I admitted. I wanted to know what it felt like to be normal, to have friends who liked me for who I was, not what I could do for them. The bookstore job was real. I just donated my paychecks back to the university's scholarship fund. She was staring at me like I was a stranger, and maybe I was. The Alex she'd known in college had been carefully constructed, a version of myself, stripped of everything that made relationships complicated. So everything was a lie? "No," I said urgently. "My feelings were real. Our friendship was real. The way I felt about you, that was the most real thing in my life. Felt about me, she repeated. Past tense. The light turned green and the car moved forward, but I felt like the world had stopped. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 8 years, the confession that had been burning in my chest since college. Feel, I corrected. The way I feel about you. The way I've felt about you since senior year. Her intake of breath was sharp, audible in the quiet car. Alex, I was going to tell you everything the night before graduation, I rushed on, afraid that if I stopped talking I'd lose my nerve again. About my family, about my feelings, about the future I wanted us to have. But then I heard your father talking about how worried he was about your future, how you needed stability, security. I realized that dating me would mean constant scrutiny, paparazzi, judgment. So you decided for me, she said quietly. You decided what I could and couldn't handle. Block 10. The things I'd done. There's more, I said, knowing that if I was going to confess everything, it had to be everything. The scholarship that paid for your teaching certification, that was me. The art supplies that showed up in your classroom every semester, me. The anonymous buyer who purchased your painting at the charity auction last year, also me. Sophia's face went through a series of expressions: shock, realization, anger, and something else I couldn't quite identify. The wedding, she said slowly, the contest, the free planning, the perfect everything, that was you too. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. I wanted you to have the perfect day, even if it meant watching you marry someone else. Oh my God. She pressed her hands to her face. Alex, do you realize what you've done? You've been controlling my life from the shadows for 8 years. You've been playing puppet master with my career, my opportunities, my relationships. I never meant it that way. How else could you mean it? She was crying now, but they were tears of frustration, not sadness. You decided I couldn't handle dating a billionaire, so you disappeared. Then you decided I needed help with my career, so you manipulated my opportunities. And today you decided I deserved a perfect wedding, so you funded my marriage to another man. The truth of her words was devastating. I told myself I was protecting her, supporting her, loving her from a distance. But what I'd really been doing was trying to control the narrative of her life, to keep her close without taking the risk of being honest about who I was and what I wanted. You're right, I said. I've been a coward. I've been selfish. I've spent 8 years making decisions about your life without giving you the chance to make them yourself. The car had pulled up to her apartment building, a modest place in a neighborhood I'd made sure was safe through increased police patrols and strategic investment in local businesses. Even now, even in this moment of brutal honesty, my influence was everywhere. I need to think, she said, gathering her wedding dress around her as she prepared to get out of the car. I need to process all of this. Sophia, wait. She paused with her hand on the door handle. 8 years, Alex. You've had 8 years to think about this. Give me at least 8 hours. Block 11. The return to face the music. After Sophia disappeared into her building, I sat in the Bentley for a long time, staring up at her windows and trying to figure out how to fix 8 years of mistakes. Eventually, I realized there was something I had to do first. I had to go back to the cathedral and face the consequences of the chaos I'd helped create. The scene when I returned was exactly what I'd expected. The guests had mostly dispersed, but the wedding party remained, along with Richard's family and a small army of photographers who'd somehow gotten word of the scandal. Richard himself was nowhere to be seen, probably holed up somewhere trying to manage his public image. I found Sophia's parents in the church vestry, looking lost and overwhelmed. Her mother was crying quietly while her father paced, his rented tuxedo rumpled from what had clearly been a very long day. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, I said, and they looked up with the confused expressions of people who recognized me but couldn't quite place how. "You're the young man from college," Mrs. Chen said finally. "Sophia's friend." "Yes, and I'm the one who paid for the wedding." The confession hung in the air between us. I explained everything: the false contest, the funding, the 8 years of anonymous support. I told them about Morrison Industries, about my feelings for their daughter, about the choices I'd made that had led us all to this moment. When I finished, Mr. Chen was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You've been helping my daughter all these years." "I have, but I realize now that I should have been honest about it from the beginning." Mrs. Chen wiped her eyes with a tissue. "She always wondered about those scholarships, those opportunities that seemed to come out of nowhere. She said they felt too good to be true." "They were real," I assured them. "She earned every one of them. I just made sure the right people knew about her talent." "And today," Mr. Chen asked, "what are your intentions today?" It was a fair question, the same one I'd been asking myself during the long drive back to the cathedral. "I'm going to tell her the truth, all of it. And then I'm going to let her decide what she wants to do with it." Block 12. Taking the microphone. When I walked back into the main cathedral, I found that about 50 people had remained. Family members, close friends, and a few curious onlookers who were hoping for more drama. The altar still held the abandoned flowers and decorations, and Richard's groomsmen were huddled in conference with what appeared to be a crisis management specialist. At the front of the cathedral, someone had set up a microphone system, probably in preparation for damage control statements. It was Miranda Ashworth, the wedding planner, who noticed me first. "Mr. Morrison," she said, approaching with the careful step of someone navigating a minefield. "I wasn't sure you'd come back." "I needed to clean up my mess," I replied. She studied me for a moment, then handed me something that made my heart stop. It was Sophia's bouquet, the one she dropped when she removed her engagement ring. The white roses were still perfect, untouched by the chaos around them. "She left this behind," Miranda said, "along with a lot of questions that only you can answer." I looked around the cathedral at the remaining guests, at the confused faces of people who'd come expecting a celebration and instead witnessed a scandal. These were Sophia's people, her family, her friends, her colleagues from the museum. They deserved an explanation, and more importantly, they deserved the truth. I walked to the microphone before I could lose my nerve. The sound system squealed slightly as I adjusted it, and the remaining conversations died away as everyone turned to look at me. "For those who don't know me," I began, my voice echoing through the cathedral, "my name is Alexander Morrison. I'm the CEO of Morrison Industries, and I'm the man who's been in love with Sophia Chen for 8 years." The murmur that went through the crowd was immediate and intense. I saw phones come out, cameras start recording, but I didn't care anymore. The time for secrets was over. "I'm also the man who paid for this wedding," I continued, "who's been supporting Sophia's career from the shadows, who's been too much of a coward to tell her how I feel until watching her marry someone else became unbearable." I held up the bouquet, and somehow, in that moment, I felt her presence. "Sophia Chen is the most extraordinary woman I've ever known," I said, and my voice carried to every corner of the cathedral. "She's brilliant, compassionate, talented, and strong enough to handle anything life throws at her, including a billionaire who's been making decisions about her life without her permission." I paused, looking directly into the camera I knew was broadcasting this moment to the world. "Sophia, if you're watching this, I need you to know you're mine. You've been mine since that first day in the coffee shop when you trusted a stranger to help you with financial aid forms. You've been mine through every anonymous gift, every secret scholarship, every moment I spent loving you from a distance. And if you'll have me, if you'll forgive me for being an idiot for 8 years, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me with your heart." I set the microphone down and walked out of the cathedral, leaving behind 8 years of silence and stepping into whatever came next.